You walk through that door, girl, and you're on your own. Savannah Hayes heard those words and walked through anyway. She was 22 years old, 3 weeks behind on rent, and so hungry her hands had stopped shaking, not because she was calm, but because her body had simply given up protesting. The sign in the window said bartender needed. The building it was nailed to was the Iron Widow, the most feared biker bar in Wyoming. And every single person in Black Creek had told her the same thing, girl, like you don't come back from a place like that. Before we go any further, if this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow Savannah's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Savannah Hayes walked into the Iron Widow, she had exactly $11 in her jacket pocket, a cracked phone screen she couldn't afford to fix, and the particular kind of desperation that doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits in the chest like a stone, heavy, cold, permanent. She had spent the last 4 hours sitting in her car outside the bar engine off watching the door, watching the men who went in and out, leather, boots, arms like tree trunks covered in ink, motorcycles parked in a row like a wall. She had counted 17 of them before she stopped counting. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was she was hoping the sign would disappear, that someone would take it down, that the decision would be made for her. It didn't disappear. So she got out of the car. The cold hit her the moment she stepped onto the gravel. Wyoming in late October had a specific kind of cold, the kind that didn't ease into you. It grabbed you by the collar and reminded you exactly where you stood. She pulled her denim jacket tighter, knowing full well it wasn't built for this weather. She'd meant to buy a real coat last winter, and the winter before that. There was always something more urgent. There always was. She stood in front of the door for a long moment. The bass from whatever was playing inside vibrated faintly through the wood. She could hear voices low, rough, overlapping. She thought about her mother. She thought about the medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter, each one stamped with red letters that no longer even embarrassed her because she had gone numb to the color. She thought about the call she'd gotten 2 days ago from the landlord. Calm voice, polite even, which made it worse somehow. Ms. Hayes, we appreciate your history with us, but 3 weeks is simply not something we can continue to accommodate. She thought about the job she no longer had, the diner where she'd worked for 2.5 years, where she'd memorized every regular's order, where she'd come in early and stayed late and never once complained out loud, even when her feet ached so badly she sat on the bathroom floor between shifts just to give them 30 seconds of rest. She had been good at that job. She had been reliable and quiet and careful. And then the owner's nephew, Brandon, had started working the weekend shifts. She didn't let herself think about that part too long. She had already spent too many nights reliving it, the way he'd cornered her, the way she'd pushed back, the way he'd twisted the story until somehow she was the one who got called into the back office and handed a box with her things. We think it's best if we part ways. The owner hadn't even looked at her directly when he said it. She hadn't cried until she was in the parking lot. And even then, she'd kept it quiet, a habit. She'd learned young that crying loudly was a luxury she didn't have. So here she was, standing in front of the door of the Iron Widow, and she pushed it open. The silence came fast. Not total silence, the music kept playing a low, gravelly rock song she didn't recognize. But the conversation stopped. She felt it before she fully processed it, that shift in a room when everyone in it turns to look at something that doesn't belong. She didn't belong. She knew it the moment she stepped fully inside and let the door swing shut behind her. The warmth of the room hit her first wood smoke, and something fried in the unmistakable weight of a space that had been occupied by the same people for a very long time. Then she registered the faces, dozens of them, all turning, all reading her the same way she'd been read her entire life in this town. Who are you and what are you doing here? She had grown used to that look. But not in a room full of like these. She stood as straight as she could manage, which wasn't entirely straight because her knees were doing something involuntary and embarrassing, so she locked them and hoped it didn't show. You lost sweetheart. The voice came from behind the bar. She turned toward it. He was in his mid-40s maybe, broad across the shoulders the way men get when they've spent decades doing physical work rather than chasing it in a gym. His hair was dark, going silver at the temples, cut short. His forearms were covered in tattoos that had faded from the sharp edges of new ink into something softer and more permanent. There was a scar that ran from just below his left ear down to his jaw, pale and old-earned before it could be hidden. His eyes were gray, and they weren't unkind exactly, but they weren't warm either. They were the eyes of a man who had learned to see clearly and trust slowly. He was looking at her the way she imagined a locked door would look at you if doors could look at things. Shut, assessing, waiting to be given a reason to open. Savannah swallowed once. "No," she said. "I'm here for the job." Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. The man behind the bar looked at her for a long moment, the kind of moment that stretched and had weight to it, and then he reached below the counter and set a glass down. "Bar's open," he said. Just that. And somehow impossibly, that was both an answer and an invitation. Yeah. His name was Ryder Cole. She learned that within the first 10 minutes of being inside, not because he told her he didn't volunteer much, but because someone at the far end of the bar called out to him and he answered. Just like that, Ryder. A name that suited him, short, blunt, the kind of name that didn't apologize for itself. He slid a tall glass of ice water across the bar to her without being asked. She hadn't realized she was thirsty until it was in front of her. "You ever bartended before?" he asked, not looking up from the receipt he was checking. "Waitressed, 2.5 years. That's not the same." "I know," she said, "but I learned fast." He looked up at her then, really looked at her, not the checking her out kind of looking, the other kind. The kind that makes you feel briefly like a person being read rather than seen. "Who told you about the position?" he asked, the sign in the window. Something crossed his face, almost amusement, though it didn't quite arrive. "That sign's been there 3 weeks. You're the first person to come through that door about it." "I know," Savannah said. "I drove past it for 3 weeks before I came in." This time the almost amusement made it a little further. Not a smile, but close. "What changed tonight?" he asked. She thought about lying. She thought about giving him the professional version. "I'm looking for a growth opportunity. I enjoy a fast-paced environment," all the phrases she'd rehearsed in the car before the cold made her honest. "I ran out of time," she said simply. He nodded once, like that was the only answer he would have trusted. "You can start Thursday," he said, 6 to close, 12 an hour plus tips. Don't steal, don't lie, don't start anything you're not prepared to finish. Any of those a problem?" "No," she said. "Good." He turned back to his receipts. "Drink your water. It's cold out there." She told exactly once a person. Her friend Dina Marsh, who she'd known since the 7th grade, and who had the distinct quality of telling you the truth even when you hadn't asked for it. Dina said exactly what Savannah expected her to say. "Savannah, no, are you out of your mind? Those aren't regular bikers. Those are Hell's Angels adjacent at the very least. Do you know what people say about that place?" "People say a lot of things," Savannah said. "People say women disappear in there." "Women disappear everywhere, Dina. At least in there I'll have a paycheck." Dina went quiet for a moment. That particular silence that meant she was processing something she didn't like, but couldn't argue against. "Be careful," she finally said. "Please." "I'm always careful," Savannah said. "That's what scares me," Dina told her. "Careful girls get taken advantage of. You need to be loud in a place like that." Savannah didn't tell her that she'd never in her life figured out how to be loud. Her mother's reaction was different. Linda Hayes did not traffic in subtlety or consideration. When Savannah told her about the mom carefully in the manner of someone diffusing something, her mother's first response was not concern. It was calculation. How much do they pay? 12 an hour plus tips. Her mother's eyes moved the way they always did when she was doing math, slightly upward, and to the left, lips barely moving. "Tips could be good with bikers," she said half to herself. "They drink heavy." "Mom," Savannah said, "don't you want to talk about whether it's safe?" Linda waved a hand, a gesture that had become so familiar over the years that Savannah barely registered it anymore. Don't complicate things that don't need complicating. That was her mother's philosophy in one motion. "You're a smart girl," Linda said. "You know how to handle men." Then she picked up her magazine again, signaling the conversation was over. Savannah stood there another moment, waiting for something she couldn't name. It didn't come. She went to her room, set her alarm for Thursday, and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. The first night was the longest night of her life. She arrived 15 minutes early, because that was who she was, and stood in the parking lot watching two men who looked like they could flip a car, unload kegs from a truck. One of them noticed her and stopped. He was enormous. Not tall exactly, but wide. The kind of wide that made you recalibrate your understanding of how much space a human being could occupy. He had a beard that could have housed small animals and a bandana tied around his head that said nothing about his mood because his face was perfectly neutral. "You the new girl?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Savannah." He looked at her the way the door looked at her the first night. Assessment. Then he nodded once. "Moose," he said, and he walked back to the truck. She understood immediately that this was not rudeness. This was simply how information was exchanged in this particular universe. Names were given, not explained. She went inside. The first rule she learned, don't apologize for taking up space. She learned it within the first 40 minutes when she slid the wrong drink to the wrong end of the bar and started to say sorry, the full reflexive over-apology she'd been trained into by years of service industry work and a childhood that rewarded invisibility. Ryder cut her off before she finished the word. "Don't," he said, simply, not harshly. She blinked. "I gave him the wrong. Fix it. Don't apologize. Apologizing makes you small. Out here, small gets noticed." She fixed it. No more words. He gave her a short nod, the smallest possible acknowledgement, but she had already figured out that from Ryder Cole, a short nod was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The second rule, you don't explain yourself to customers. A man named Garrett, who came in every Thursday and had apparently decided that the new blonde bartender was an interesting development, started asking her questions in that particular way. Not aggressive exactly, but persistent. Where was she from? Was she new in town? Did she have a boyfriend? The escalating inquiry of a man who considers conversation a ladder. She answered the first two. She deflected the third. He pushed. She was opening her mouth to deflect again, carefully or professionally, the way she'd been trained to manage this when a coffee mug landed on the bar between them. Not slammed, just set down, firmly, with intent. Ryder didn't even look at Garrett. He looked at Savannah. "Need you to check the cooler inventory." She understood immediately that the cooler inventory was not the point. "Sure," she said. She went. When she came back, Garrett was at the far end of the bar talking to someone else. Ryder didn't say anything about it. He just handed her the next order. She realized then that the protection wasn't announced here. It didn't come with speeches. It simply arrived quiet and efficient, and then it was done. By the end of the first week, she had learned 4 more things. First, Moose walked every female employee to their car, every single night, without exception. The first night she'd protested, "I'm fine, it's just the parking lot," and he looked at her with such complete patience that she'd felt briefly ashamed of her own argument. "It's not about the parking lot," he'd said. "It's about the dark road between the lot and wherever you're going. Get in the habit." She got in the habit. Second, a biker couple named Dale and Ruth Ann lived in the apartment above the garage attached to the bar. Ruth Ann had a voice like a radio announcer. From 1955, clear and warm and precise, and she had, without any apparent discussion or decision, begun leaving a covered plate for Savannah in the small back kitchen before every shift. Just food. Always something hot. The first time it happened, Savannah had looked at it and felt something she couldn't immediately name. It took her a while to recognize that she hadn't expected kindness. She had braced for everything else. Kindness had arrived without warning, and her defenses had no protocol for it. Third, the bar had rules, real ones, written nowhere but understood everywhere. No one touched the staff. No one made the waitresses feel unsafe. Anyone who crossed that line left, not asked, removed, and did not come back. She witnessed it happen twice in her first week. Both times were quick. Both times were quiet. Both times made her understand that this was not theater. The rules were real because the people enforcing them had decided they were real. That was enough. Fourth, and this was the one she hadn't expected, these men had histories. Complex ones. Dale, who looked like he'd been in 100 fights and won most of them, had a photograph of a granddaughter in his wallet that he showed anyone who asked. Moose, who she'd been terrified of the first night, turned out to do crossword puzzles at the end of the bar when things slowed down and got genuinely irritated when he couldn't finish the Thursday puzzle. A younger biker named Colt, who couldn't have been older than 25, was quietly putting himself through a welding certification program at the community college. She had expected a monolith. She had found people. The town, meanwhile, had noticed. She knew the moment she walked into the grocery store on a Sunday morning and felt a particular shift in temperature that has nothing to do with air conditioning. Mrs. Albright from her mother's church was in the cereal aisle, and the way she looked at Savannah, that swift searching, "I know something about you" look, told her immediately that word had traveled. She bought her groceries. She said hello to Mrs. Albright. She did not explain herself. On the way out, she passed two women from her old diner coworkers she'd eaten lunch with for 2 years. One of them looked away. The other gave her a small, tight, careful smile. The kind of smile that means, "I see you, but I can't afford to be seen seeing you." She drove home. She didn't cry, but she sat in the driveway longer than she needed to before going inside. 3 weeks in, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. She was restocking the shelves behind the bar, moving on muscle memory by now, when a woman came in and sat at the far end. Not a regular, not a biker's wife or girlfriend, just a woman, maybe 40, hair pulled back, wearing the specific kind of exhausted that goes all the way down to the bone. She ordered a soda, just a soda, and she sat there for 20 minutes not drinking it, just staring at the bar top. Savannah watched her without watching her, a skill she'd developed over years of being a waitress. You can observe everything in your peripheral vision if you learn to keep your center gaze occupied. After 20 minutes, the woman pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and made a sound so small and controlled that only someone listening for it would have caught it. Savannah refilled her soda without being asked. She didn't say anything, just refilled it and left the glass there. The woman looked up. Her eyes were red at the edges. "Thank you," she said. "Anytime," Savannah said. The woman looked at her another moment, deciding something. Then quietly, carefully, as if testing whether the floor would hold, "Does anyone here know who I can talk to about my husband is—" She stopped, started again. "He did something, and I went to the police and they told me I was—" She stopped again. Savannah set down the rag she'd been holding. "What did they tell you?" she asked. The woman told her, and that was the moment, that precise, ordinary Tuesday night moment, when Savannah first understood that whatever was happening in the Iron Widow was not the most dangerous thing in Black Creek. She brought it to Ryder the next evening. He was in the back office doing something with a laptop, which had surprised her the first time she'd seen it. She'd somehow not pictured him as a laptop person, and she knocked twice on the door frame. "Come in," he said without looking up. "The woman from last night," she said. "The one who was alone." "I know who you mean." She said she went to the police about her husband, and they sent her home. Told her she was— Savannah paused, finding the words. Told her she was exaggerating. Ryder's jaw moved slightly, just slightly, but she was learning to read him, and that small jaw movement was significant. "What's her name?" he asked. "Karen Dowell. Her husband's name is—" "Keith Dowell," Ryder said, not a question. Savannah went still. "You know him?" Ryder finally looked up, those gray eyes steady and a degree colder than a moment ago. "Keith Dowell coaches youth football, serves on 3 town committees, golfs with the mayor on weekends." He paused. "And his wife came in here the same night 14 months ago. Different bartender. Same story." The silence between them had texture to it. "They sent her home then, too?" Savannah asked. "Sheriff's deputy took the report," Ryder said. "Pomona." "Report disappeared." "Disappeared how?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "That," he said carefully, "is a question I'd encourage you not to ask too loudly." She should have listened. She would look back on this moment many times in the months ahead, this precise moment, the two of them in the back office, his warning hanging in the air between them, like something she could have caught and held on to. She should have held on to it. Instead, she nodded, said goodnight, and walked out to finish her shift. And somewhere in the space between leaving his office and picking up her next order, she made a decision she didn't yet know she'd made. She was going to find out where those reports went. The night she started pulling threads, she had no idea what was woven into the other end. She would, very soon. She would. She started small. That was the thing about Savannah. She had never in her life had the luxury of starting big. Big required resources. Big required backup. Big required the kind of confidence that comes from knowing someone will catch you if you fall. She had none of those things. So she started small, the way she'd always done everything, quietly, carefully, and without announcing her intentions to anyone. She began keeping a notebook, not digital, physical, a cheap, spiral-bound one she bought at the gas station 2 towns over, paying cash, which she recognized, even as she did, it was probably paranoid. But the paranoia felt earned somehow. She didn't examine it too closely. She just paid cash, drove back to Black Creek, and that night at the bar between orders, she started writing down what she remembered. Names, dates, what Karen Dowell had told her, the name of the deputy who'd taken the first report 14 months ago. The word Ryder had used disappeared. She wrote that word in the margin and circled it twice. She told herself she was just organizing information, just being thorough. The way she used to organize the diner's inventory sheets when the system was messy, because disorder bothered her on a molecular level, and because putting things in order was the only form of control she'd ever really had. She told herself it was nothing more than that. She was lying to herself, and some part of her knew it. But that part stayed quiet, and she let it. The second woman came in on a Friday. Her name was Patrice. She offered it without being asked, which Savannah had already learned was unusual. And she was younger than Karen, maybe 32, 33, with the tight, careful stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. She sat at the bar and ordered a beer she nursed for an hour, and she kept looking at the door. Not the way people look at doors when they're expecting someone. The way they look when they're afraid of who might come through. Savannah recognized that look intimately. She didn't push. She refilled the beer when it got low. She made sure Patrice was in her line of sight without making it obvious. And at the 40-minute mark, Patrice said very quietly without looking up, "Someone told me this was a safe place." Savannah paused, set down the glass she was polishing. "Who told you that?" Karen Dowell. She said. The woman behind the bar listened. Something moved in Savannah's chest, warm and complicated and a little frightening. "I listened," she said carefully. "That's all I did." "That's more than the police did," Patrice said. And then she told her story. It was different from Karen's in the details and identical in the shape. A husband, an incident, a report filed, a deputy, the same deputy Savannah noted writing the name in her mental notebook, who had taken down the information with the particular brand of bored patience that communicates very clearly that nothing will come of this, and that the woman filing the report should understand that before she leaves. And then nothing. A follow-up call 2 weeks later that went unreturned. A second call, then a letter from the county office informing her that the case had been reviewed and found insufficient for further action. Insufficient. Savannah wrote that word in her notebook later that night, underlined it, set her pen down and stared at it for a long time. She was on her third page before she realized she had crossed some invisible line between organizing information and actually investigating something. The realization didn't stop her. It just changed the temperature of what she was doing. She brought it to Ryder again. She had developed a habit of this without meaning to, not because he welcomed it exactly, but because he never shut the door on it either. He listened. He didn't waste words. And he had a quality she was learning to rely on. He told her the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable. 3 women, she said, setting her notebook on the corner of his desk. In 4 weeks, same pattern, same deputy. Ryder looked at the notebook but didn't pick it up. Deputy's name, he said. Heller, Travis Heller. Something moved in Ryder's face. That jaw thing again. She was getting fluent in his expressions. Heller's been with the department 11 years, he said. Close, personal friend of the sheriff. The sheriff, she repeated. Mason Whitmore. That's the one. Ryder leaned back in his chair. Man's been sheriff here going on 16 years. Coaches Little League in the summer. Cuts the ribbon at every new business opening. His picture's on the wall at the elementary school because he donated the library computers. And, Savannah said, because there were clearly an and. And every person in this town who's ever tried to push back against someone powerful has ended up with their case reviewed and found insufficient, she said. He looked at her directly. You're starting to connect dots that powerful people have spent a lot of money making sure stay unconnected. I know, she said. Savannah. He said her name the way people say it when they need you to actually hear what comes after it. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm telling you you need to understand what you're walking toward. What am I walking toward? He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man choosing how much truth to give. Mason Whitmore doesn't just protect people, Ryder said. He collects them. Every business owner in this town owes him something. Every official. The DA is his college roommate. The county commissioner's son got a DUI buried 2 years ago, courtesy of a favor. He paused. The man has been building a wall around himself for 16 years, and he is very good at making people who threaten that wall very sorry they tried. Savannah absorbed this. But you know all of this, she said slowly. Why haven't you? Because I know what I am, Ryder said. It came out flat and clear without self-pity. The moment this bar makes noise about Mason Whitmore, it's not an investigation. It's a biker gang in attacking a respected law enforcement official. That's the headline. That's the only headline anyone in this county will print. He met her eyes. My hands are tied in ways yours aren't. Yet. That last word landed differently than the rest. Yet. She picked up her notebook. She went back out to the bar. She did her job. She smiled at the customers and made change and called last round at the right time. And the whole time that word sat in her chest like something planted. Yet it was Ruth Ann who first told her about the others. Ruth Ann who fed her and asked how she was sleeping and had the particular gift of making you feel seen without making you feel exposed. Ruth Ann sat across from her one quiet Sunday afternoon in the apartment above the garage and put her hands flat on the table and said, "Baby, what are you doing with that notebook?" Savannah looked up startled. "How do you know about the notebook?" Ruth Ann smiled the small, patient smile of a woman who has seen everything. "Dale mentioned you were writing things down at the bar. I know what that looks like on someone. I've seen it before." She paused. "On the woman who used to run the food bank on Route 9, before she left town suddenly. Before her car was found outside the county line with the windows broken and her things still in it." Savannah's hand went still. "What happened to her?" she asked. "Officially, she moved away voluntarily." "Stress of the job." Ruth Ann looked at her steadily. "Her name was Gail Mercer. She'd been collecting the same kind of information you're collecting right now. She was going to take it to a journalist in Cheyenne." She paused. "She never made it to Cheyenne." The air in the room changed. "Is she?" Savannah started. "She's alive," Ruth Ann said quickly. "She's in Denver now, changed her number. Won't talk about Black Creek to anyone." She reached across the table and covered Savannah's hand with hers. "I'm not telling you this to scare you." "It's scaring me," Savannah said honestly. "Good," Ruth Ann said with unexpected firmness. "It should. Fear is information. The question is what you do with it." She held Savannah's gaze. "The question I'm asking you is, what are you doing with it?" Savannah looked down at her notebook, at the 3 pages of neat, careful handwriting, at the circled word disappeared. "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. That same evening, a man named Warren Gill sat down at the bar and ordered a whiskey, and in the way of certain men who had carried something too long, he started talking before the glass was fully in front of him. He was 60, maybe 62, with the particular weathering of a man who'd worked outdoors most of his life. He'd been a crew foreman at the mining operation east of town for 22 years. Last month, he'd reported a wage theft scheme, workers being clocked out early while continuing to work the difference pocketed by the site manager, a practice apparently running for at least 18 months and involving upward of 40 workers. He'd gone to the labor board. He'd gone to the county commissioner's office. He'd sent a letter to the state office in Cheyenne. Last week, someone had put a dead animal on his front porch. "I got a wife and 2 grandkids," Warren said, looking at his whiskey rather than at her. I'm not a brave man. I want you to know I'm not pretending to be. But those were my guys. Those were men who trusted me. And 40 families had money taken from them for a year and a half, and nobody will even..." His voice broke cleanly, like something that had been holding, and suddenly couldn't. He pressed his mouth together, recovered the way men of his generation had been trained to recover quickly in public. "Sorry," he said. "Don't apologize," Savannah said. He looked at her slightly surprised. "Don't apologize," she said again more firmly. "You're not wrong for being angry about this." He stared at her for a moment. Then something in his posture shifted, not fully, not dramatically, but the way something shifts when it's been clenched too long and finally gets permission to ease. "The site manager," he said. "His name is Briggs, Danny Briggs. And the reason nobody's touching this is because Danny Briggs goes fishing every second Saturday of the month with Sheriff Whitmore. There it was again, the same wall, the same name at its center. She wrote Warren's story in the notebook that night. She was on page 7. Over the next 3 weeks, page 7 became page 14, then 20. Then she ran out of pages in the first notebook and bought a second one, also with cash, also 2 towns over. The shape that was emerging terrified her and compelled her in equal and inseparable measure. It was not chaos. That was the thing. It was not random corruption, the kind that grows in undisciplined darkness without architecture. It was structured. It had a logic. Mason Whitmore did not simply protect his friends and bury inconvenient truths. He maintained a system. A careful, patient, 16 years in the making system of mutual obligation and strategic debt. He held markers on nearly every power center in Black Creek, financial markers, legal markers, personal ones. The DA owed him. The commissioner owed him. 3 of the 5 town council members owed him something that would not survive daylight. And in return, Whitmore ran his jurisdiction the way a private landlord runs a building. His rules, his terms, and anyone who couldn't make rent in the ways he required found themselves very suddenly without a home. She explained this to Ryder one evening, laying the notebooks on his desk. He didn't touch them. He looked at her instead. "How long have you been building this?" he asked. "About 5 weeks. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, does anyone else know, Ruth Ann?" she said. "And I told Dina, my friend, not the details, just that I was looking into something." Ryder leaned forward. "Call Dina tonight. Tell her to stop knowing anything about this, for her own protection." He held her gaze. "I mean that." The urgency in his voice was new. It moved through her like cold water. "Ryder," she said, "what are you not telling me?" He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. It was not fear. She didn't think Ryder Cole was particularly available to fear in the conventional sense. It was something older and more specific. The look of a man standing in front of a door he has stood in front of before, knowing what's on the other side. 6 years ago, he said, "A woman came to me, not to the bar, to me personally. She was a social worker in the county system. She'd found evidence that children were being removed from safe homes, minority families mostly, and placed with families that were connected to Whitmore's network. Not because the original homes were dangerous, because someone wanted those placements and those families didn't have the resources to fight back." He stopped. "She gave me documentation. I told her to take it to the state. I told her she had enough." He paused. "She was fired within 2 weeks. Her license was revoked on a fabricated ethics complaint. She left the state." The room was very quiet. "And the documentation?" Savannah asked. "Gone," he said. "Her apartment was broken into while she was at the hearing for her license. Nothing taken except her files and her laptop." Savannah felt the cold moving up from her stomach now. "That was 6 years ago," she said carefully. "So you've known about Whitmore for—" "I've known about Whitmore for a long time," Ryder said. "And I've known for a long time that going at him wrong doesn't wound him. It just teaches him how to be more careful." He looked at her notebooks, then at her. "But those are more pages than the social worker had, and you're not coming at it from inside the system where he can reach." She waited. He seemed to be deciding something significant. "There's a journalist," he said, "in Cheyenne. Name is Marcus Webb. He covered county corruption in 3 other Wyoming jurisdictions in the last decade. 2 of those ended in federal indictments. He's been looking at Black Creek for 2 years, but he can't get anyone to talk on record." "Why not?" Savannah asked. "Because everyone who knows something has something to lose," Ryder said. "And Whitmore knows exactly what that something is for every single one of them." "But I don't," Savannah said. She heard it as she said it, the thing she hadn't consciously known until it came out of her mouth. She had no business connections in Black Creek, no political relationships, no old boys network obligations. She was a 22-year-old waitress turned bartender who had moved through this town her whole life without ever accumulating the kind of presence that powerful men considered worth controlling. She had been too small, too unremarkable, too thoroughly a person nobody had ever felt the need to account for. It had felt like a wound her whole life. In this moment, it felt like a weapon. Ryder was watching her face, following whatever was moving across it. "You're thinking something," he said. "I'm thinking I have nothing to lose," she said. "And that means I'm the one person in this town he can't leverage." The word leverage landed between them and sat there, And Ryder looked at her the way he'd looked at her that very first night, that reading look, the one that made her feel like a door being assessed. I can reach out to Marcus Webb, he said slowly. I can make an introduction. But Savannah, he stopped. Once you make that call, once you give him what's in those notebooks, there's no version of this where you stay invisible. She understood what he was saying. She heard it fully. She thought about Karen Dowell pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. She thought about Warren Gill's voice breaking and recovering with that terrible practiced efficiency. She thought about Gail Mercer, whose car had been found outside the county line with the windows broken. She thought about herself at 17 watching her father get sicker and cheaper, medical options run out, and nothing and nobody in any official position doing a single thing that was actually useful. The particular helplessness of being a person the system has not built itself to protect. She had felt that helplessness her whole life. She had mistaken it for her own smallness. She understood now that it was not her smallness at all. It was the size of what was standing on top of her. Make the call, she said. And that was the moment, that precise, quiet, unremarkable moment in the back office of a biker bar on a Wednesday evening when everything in Black Creek, Wyoming began to move towards something it could not come back from. She walked out to finish her shift. She made drinks. She smiled at customers. She called last round at the right time, and her hand, she noticed, was not shaking, not even slightly. Marcus Webb called her back within 48 hours. She had expected to wait longer. She had steeled herself for the particular silence of being ignored, the unreturned call, the polite deflection, the gentle professional suggestion that perhaps she didn't have quite what she thought she had. She had rehearsed her response to that silence. She had prepared to be patient. Instead, her phone rang at 7:14 in the morning, 2 days after Ryder made the introduction, and a man's voice said, "Is this Savannah Hayes?" And when she said yes, he said, "I've been waiting 2 years for someone in Black Creek to pick up a phone. Tell me everything." So she did. It took 3 hours. She sat at her kitchen table with both notebooks open in front of her, and she went through it systematically, the way she'd organized the diner inventory, the way she'd organized everything in her life that mattered, carefully, thoroughly, nothing left out. Marcus Webb asked sharp questions, good ones, the kind that told her he already knew the shape of what she was describing, had been circling it from the outside, and was now getting his first clear look at the interior. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How many people know you're doing this?" he asked. "Ryder, Ruth Ann, my friend Dina, though I haven't told her specifics." "Cut Dina out entirely," he said, not unkindly. "Anyone who knows you're involved is a potential pressure point. Whitmore doesn't come at people directly when he can help it. He comes at the people around them." The coldness of that settled in her. "Okay," she said. "The notebooks," he said, "I need copies. Physical copies mailed to me and also photographed and uploaded to a secure link I'm going to send you. Do not email them from your home address. Go to the library 2 towns over, use a guest computer, and use the upload link from there." He paused. "This sounds excessive." "It doesn't," she said. "It sounds like someone who understands what I'm dealing with." "I do," he said quietly. "I covered a sheriff in Laramie County 4 years ago who ran the same architecture. Different man, same blueprint. It took 14 months in 3 sources going on record before anyone moved." Another pause. "You're further along than any of those sources were at this point. The pattern you've documented is cleaner than anything I expected." She felt something lift slightly in her chest, the specific relief of being believed. "What do we do next?" she asked. "You keep doing exactly what you're doing," he said. "You stay inside that bar. You keep listening. You keep those notebooks locked somewhere safe. That is not your apartment. And when I'm ready to move the story, when I have enough corroboration to publish and survive a lawsuit, I'll need you on a record. Your name, your testimony." He paused once more. "That's when it gets dangerous. Are you prepared for that?" She thought of Gail Mercer. She thought of the broken car windows. She thought of the dead animal on Warren Gill's porch. "Ask me again when we get there," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. She kept her word about Dina. She called her that afternoon and kept it simple. "I can't talk about what I'm working on anymore. It's not that I don't trust you. It's that trust isn't the issue. Please just let it go for now." Dina was hurt. Savannah could hear it in the silence. But Dina was also sharp, and she heard something in Savannah's voice that stopped her from pushing. "You're in something," Dina said. I'm fine, Savannah said. That's not what I asked. I know, Savannah said. I'll call you when I can. I love you. She hung up before the conversation could cost either of them more than it already had. The first week after the call with Marcus Webb was almost normal. She worked her shifts. She listened. She added to the notebooks. 3 more workers from the mining crew came into the bar in separate evenings and told versions of Warren Gill's story with different details and the same shape. A woman named Sylvia, who worked at the county clerk's office, came in on a Tuesday, drank 1 glass of wine, and told Savannah very quietly that she had seen case files being pulled from the system, not deleted, pulled physically removed by someone with a department key card on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 years. She didn't know by whom. She hadn't asked. She had been afraid to ask. Do you still work there? Savannah asked. For now, Sylvia said, and the way she said for now communicated everything. Savannah photographed the notebook pages that weekend. She drove to the library and Rollins used a guest terminal, uploaded everything to the secure link Marcus had sent. Then she drove to the post office and mailed physical copies to 3 different addresses Marcus had given her, a precaution she hadn't expected, but understood immediately. If 1 copy disappeared, 2 remained. She was driving back on Route 9 when she noticed the truck. Dark, no plates she could make out in the rear view. 3 car lengths back and matching her speed with the particular precision of something that wasn't coincidence. She turned off Route 9 onto the county road. The truck turned too. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She thought very clearly, without panic, which surprised her. Don't go home. She drove to the bar instead, pulled into the lot, went directly inside. She sat at the bar for 20 minutes watching the window. The truck did not pull in. When she described it to Ryder, his expression didn't change. But he picked up his phone and made a call. She wasn't part of speaking in low tones in the back hallway. When he came back, he set his phone down and looked at her. You're staying here tonight, he said. Ryder, I can't just... Savannah. He cut her off cleanly. This isn't a suggestion. Dale and Ruth Ann have the spare room. It's 1 night. We see what happens. She stayed. Nothing happened that night, but the following morning, Moose came to the door of the spare room at 7 a.m. and told her with the particular economy of a man who didn't embellish your tires. Both front tires slashed clean. She stood in the parking lot and looked at them and felt something cold move through her. Not fear exactly, or not only fear, rage too. The specific rage of someone who has been doing everything carefully and correctly and being punished for it anyway. She called Marcus from the bar's landline. It's starting, he said when she told him. This is what happens when they know someone's close. They try to make you feel unsafe before they try anything harder. Before, she said. Before, he confirmed. Don't go home alone. Don't drive alone on rural roads at night. And do not under any circumstances back down visibly. The moment you look scared, it signals to them that the pressure is working. She thought about that on the drive home, Moose following in his truck, until she pulled into her parking space, then waiting until she was inside. She thought about what it meant to not look scared when the fear was real and physical and sitting in her chest like something with weight. She decided it meant the same thing it had always meant for her. You put your shoulders back, you keep your voice level, and you do the next thing. The next thing was her shift. She worked it. She was good at it by now, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected to become. She knew the regulars. She knew who needed a refill before they asked, who needed a few minutes before they were ready to order, who needed to talk, and who needed to be left alone. She had discovered in the past 2 months that she was genuinely good at reading people. She had always been good at it. She'd simply never been in a place that valued the skill before. That Tuesday, a teenager came in, 17, maybe 18, male slight with the particular look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. He sat at the far end of the bar and asked for a Coke, and Savannah brought it without comment, and he sat there for 20 minutes before she drifted close enough to invite conversation without demanding it. You okay? She asked. He looked up. His left eye was swollen at the outer corner, not fresh, maybe 4 or 5 days old in that specific yellow-green stage of healing. I'm fine, he said. The standard answer, the one that means nothing. She waited. After a moment, you know Colt? He asked. Guy that comes in here, young guy does welding? I know Colt, she said. He said this was a place you could come if you needed. He stopped, looked at his Coke. My buddy and me, we were jumped, last month, by some guys, older guys, they had money, you could tell. Beat the hell out of both of us and took our phones and wallets and laughed about it. He swallowed. We went to the police. Deputy Heller took our report. He stopped again. And, Savannah said, though she already knew. And he told us we'd probably started it and couldn't remember. He said kids like us have a way of provoking things and then crying a victim. The boy's jaw tightened. We were in the hospital. Both of us. My buddy had a broken rib. Kids like us, Savannah repeated. What does that mean? We're from the reservation, he said simply. She set down what she was holding. She looked at him directly. What are the names of the men who jumped you? She asked. He told her. One of them was the mayor's son. She wrote it down that night. Both notebooks were nearly full now. She bought a third. She was on her way to becoming a person who had 3 notebooks full of what one man's corruption had done to one small town over 16 years, and the knowledge that it was still not enough, not yet, to bring that structure down in a way it couldn't recover from. It needed to be enough soon, because whoever had slashed her tires was not going to stop there. The video appeared online 3 weeks later. She found out about it from Dina, who texted at 6 in the morning, "Call me right now." She called. Dina's voice was controlled in the way of someone managing something serious. There's a video going around on the local Facebook group and 2 others. It's a compilation, your photos, some lifted from your old social media, some, I don't know where they got them, with captions. Savannah, they're calling you a... She stopped, inhaled. They're saying you're a biker girlfriend, that you're on drugs, that you fabricated harassment claims at the diner to extort the owner. They have a fake screenshot of a text conversation. Her voice cracked slightly. It looks real. I know it's not, but it looks real. Savannah sat down, didn't realize she'd sat until she was already sitting. How many people have seen it? She asked. It's been shared 60 times in the last 3 hours, Dina said. Savannah, some of these people are your mother's friends. People from church, your old co-workers. She was quiet for a moment, processing, organizing. Is my mother's name anywhere in it? She asked. No. Okay. She breathed once. Don't respond to it. Don't comment. Don't share a response. Let it sit. Let it sit. Dina's voice went up. Savannah people are believing this. I know, she said, but the moment I respond, I'm in a public fight with an anonymous account. And that's exactly what they want. They want me loud and defensive and distracted. She paused. I'll call Marcus. She called Marcus. He had already seen it. Of course he had. He had alerts set for her name. This is escalation, he said. This is them doing due diligence before something harder. The video is a test. They're measuring how you respond and how much community support you lose. He paused. How bad is it on your end? My landlord called this morning, as she said he's received complaints from other tenants, that he needs to discuss my lease. A silence. Don't lose the apartment, Marcus said. Oh, whatever it costs, do not lose stable housing. It becomes a destabilization tactic, homeless. And fighting a corruption case is a very different thing than housed and fighting a corruption case. I understand, she said. She paid 2 months' rent up front. It wiped her savings. She did it anyway. Her mother called that evening. Linda Hayes had clearly seen the video. Savannah knew it before her mother said a word. She could hear it in the particular tone her mother used when she was managing embarrassment. Not anger, not concern, embarrassment, the social calculus running in real time. Mrs. Pruitt from church called me, her mother said. I know, Savannah said. She asked if you were all right. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her I'm fine. Savannah, a pause. Are you in some kind of trouble? She thought about all the true answers to that question. She thought about the notebooks, about Karen and Patrice and Warren and Sylvia and the boy from the reservation with the healing bruise around his eye. She thought about Gail Mercer's car outside the county line with the windows broken. I'm doing something important, she said. That's different from trouble. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Important doesn't pay rent, she finally said. I paid rent, Savannah said. Good night, Mom. She hung up. She sat with it for exactly 5 minutes, the hurt of it, the specific ache of being her mother's daughter, the grief of wanting something from that relationship that was simply not available. She gave herself 5 minutes. Then she picked up the phone and called Marcus back to talk about the next step. This was the discipline she had built without naming it. Feel the thing, then move. 2 days later, her apartment was broken into. She wasn't there. She was at the bar. She came home to a door that was unlocked, not kicked in, unlocked, which was somehow worse, which implied a key or a skill in a space that had been searched. Carefully, but not carefully enough to be invisible. Drawers slightly off. Books moved. Her laptop open, which she never left open. They hadn't taken anything visible. They had been looking for the notebooks. The notebooks were in a lockbox at the bar inside Ryder's office behind a false panel in the wall that Dale had built specifically for this purpose after the tires were slashed. She had moved them there 4 days earlier on Ryder's instruction with the specific feeling of someone who had been warned something was coming and had barely moved in time. She stood in her apartment and felt the violation of it. The particular skin-crawling knowledge that someone had stood in her space, touched her things, looked for what she was building. She felt the fear they were trying to create. Then she took photographs of every displaced item, sent them to Marcus, called the police to report a break-in, and watched Deputy Heller take her report with the same bored patience she now recognized as institutional. "Doesn't look like forced entry," Heller said, looking at the door. "No," she agreed. "Probably just left it unlocked," he said. "I don't leave my door unlocked," she said. He wrote something down. It didn't matter what. She already knew this report was going into the same place all the other reports went. What Heller didn't know, what she had not told him, and never would, was that Marcus Webb had already sent the first round of her material to a colleague at the Associated Press. The story wasn't in one place anymore. It was moving. And then 11 days later, the bar burned. She got the call at 2:17 in the morning. It was Colt, his voice stripped of its usual even quality, just, "Savannah, the bar. Come now." She drove there knowing and still not prepared for knowing. The Iron Widow was gone. The structure stood the bones of it, the walls, but the interior was ash and black water, and the specific devastation of a fire that had been thorough. Years of Dale's photographs on the walls. Ruth Ann's covered plates in the back kitchen. The corner where Moose did his crosswords. The bar stool where she'd sat the first night, shaking while Ryder asked her one question, and the whole direction of her life turned on her answer. Gone. She stood in the parking lot and watched the fire crew work and felt something enormous and wordless moving through her. Ryder was beside her. At some point, she didn't see him arrive. He was simply there the way he had always been present, without announcement. "The lockbox," she said. "The notebooks." "In my truck," he said. "I pulled them before the crew arrived." She exhaled. He looked at the building for a long moment. His face was doing something she'd never seen it do. Not breaking, not collapsing, but holding something enormous at a very great cost. "Ryder," she said quietly. 16 years, he said. Not to her specifically, just into the air between them. Dale built the bar counter himself. Took him 3 weekends. He stopped. His jaw moved. Ruth Ann planted those window boxes in the spring of 2009. She didn't say anything. She stood beside him, and they watched what remained. The arson investigators' report, which came 6 days later, was officially inconclusive. Cause undetermined. Consistent with electrical fault. Ryder had had the electrical inspected 14 months prior. She knew it. He knew it. The investigator knew it. But the official report said inconclusive. And the Black Creek Courier ran a story the following Friday that quoted an anonymous source, suggesting the fire was possibly connected to the bar's alleged ties to organized crime. Organized crime, the Iron Widow, which had rules against touching the staff, which had Moose walking women to their cars every single night, which had fed her before every shift and kept the notebooks that might undo Mason Whitmore. Organized crime. She was sitting in Dale and Ruth Ann's apartment, the apartment above the burned bar, which had survived because the fire had stayed below, reading the article on her phone when Ruth Ann set a cup of coffee in front of her and said simply, "Don't." "Don't what?" Savannah said. "Don't let it be the thing that breaks you," Ruth Ann said. "They want you to break here. This is where they think you'll break." Savannah looked at her, at this woman who had lost her kitchen and her window boxes and 16 years of photographs that morning, who was now sitting across from her, making sure Savannah didn't come apart. "What about you?" Savannah asked. "What breaks you?" Ruth Ann was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," she said finally. "Not anymore. I've already survived the thing that was supposed to break me." She looked at Savannah directly. "You have too. You just haven't realized it yet." Savannah looked back at her phone, at the article, At the words organized crime in 11-point font. She called Marcus Webb. I saw it, he said immediately. How long, she asked. How much longer before you can publish? 2 weeks, he said, maybe 3. I have 4 sources going on record now. I have Sylvia from the clerk's office. I have Warren Gill. I have the AP involved. Once the AP is moving a story, Whitmore's reach stops at the county line. He paused. 2 weeks, Savannah. Can you hold 2 weeks? She thought about the burned bar, the slashed tires, the broken-into apartment, the video, the article. I've held longer than that unless, she said. She hung up. She looked at Ruth Ann. 2 weeks, she said. Ruth Ann nodded, refilled her coffee, sat back down, and that night in the apartment above the ash of the Iron Widow, with the notebooks locked in Ryder's truck, and Marcus Webb's story building in Cheyenne like something gathering mass, Savannah Hayes did not break. She waited. Because she had learned something in the last 3 months that she had not known before she walked through that door on a freezing Thursday night, the people willing to burn things down to stop you were also always the people most afraid of what you were building. And she was still building. The 2 weeks Marcus had promised became 10 days. She found out not from a phone call, but from her phone buzzing at 6:40 in the morning, with Dina's name on the screen, and when she answered, Dina wasn't talking. She was just making a sound, a compressed, stunned sound, the kind that comes before words when words haven't organized themselves yet. Dina, Savannah said sharply, what happened? It's online. Dina said, stay in Antupad. Savannah, it's everywhere, the AP story. Marcus Webb's piece ran at midnight. It's been picked up by, I'm counting, 14 outlets. The Denver Post, the Salt Lake Tribune. Someone on Twitter with 2 million followers shared it an hour ago, and it's... She stopped. Savannah, it has your name in it, your full name, with a photograph. Savannah sat up in the spare bed in Dale and Ruth Ann's apartment. The room was still dark. Outside, she could hear the Wyoming wind doing what it always did in November, which was announce itself without apology. How bad is the photograph? She asked. The question surprised her even as she asked it the absurd practicality of it. Dina made a sound that was almost a laugh. It's a good one, actually. You look serious. You look like someone who means it. Savannah exhaled. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the information land. All of it. Her name. In print. Attached to 2 notebooks worth of documented corruption in a town where the sheriff had spent 16 years making people sorry for less. Okay, she said. Okay, Dina repeated. That's all you've got. It's what I've got right now, Savannah said. I'll call you back. She knocked on Ryder's door at 6:55. He opened it immediately, which told her he hadn't been asleep either. He had his phone in his hand and he looked at her with those gray eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, you've seen it. Dina called me, she said. He stepped back from the door. She came in. He poured coffee, actual coffee, which she had learned he made before dawn, every day a habit from years she hadn't asked about yet, and set a mug in front of her. Marcus called me at midnight when it posted, Ryder said. I've been making calls since 1 a.m. What kind of calls? She asked. The kind that makes sure you're not alone today, he said simply. She looked at him. She had spent 4 months learning to read Ryder Cole, and she understood now what that sentence meant in his particular language. It meant he had spent the last 5 hours mobilizing every resource he had. It meant the decision had already been made by him quietly, without drama, in the way he made all decisions that mattered. What's he doing? She asked. Whitmore. Nothing yet, Ryder said, which is the concerning part. She understood that immediately. A man who responds loudly has revealed his panic. A man who goes quiet is calculating. Marcus says the AP story has enough corroboration that Whitmore can't simply deny it. Ryder continued, he's going to need a strategy, and his strategy historically is to identify the weakest point and apply pressure there. He paused and looked at her directly. You need to not be the weakest point. How? She asked. You need to not be alone, and you need to not be reachable in the ways he's used to reaching people. He set down his coffee mug. There's a place, about 40 miles into the mountains, a property owned by a family connected to the network here. Completely private, off-grid, secure. We use it when situations require it. She stared at him. You want me to go into hiding? I want you to go somewhere safe while the story does what it's going to do, he said. There's a difference. Is there? She said. Yes, he said. Hiding is reactive. You going to this property is strategic. You stay visible through Marcus. You stay reachable by phone. You give interviews from there if it comes to that. But you do it from somewhere Whitmore can't physically put pressure on you. He held her gaze. This isn't me asking you to disappear. This is me asking you to let us protect you in the way we know how. She thought about the slashed tires, the broken-into apartment, the burned bar, the video, all the escalating pressure of a man who had spent 16 years building a wall, watching the first real crack appear. How long, she asked. Until he's arrested or until we know he's backed off, Ryder said. Could be days, could be 2 weeks. She thought about her mother, her apartment, the ordinary architecture of her daily life such as it was. Then she thought about Gail Mercer. All right, she said, but I need to call Marcus first, and I need to tell my mother something. Tell her you're staying with friends, Ryder said, which is true. She called Marcus at 7:15. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been sitting with his phone. His voice was alert and tight with the specific energy of someone who had been awake for 24 hours and running on the adrenaline of something enormous moving. The story's doing what I hoped, he said immediately. State Attorney General's office called my editor at 6 this morning. They were opening a preliminary inquiry. That's not an investigation yet, don't get excited, but it's movement and it's fast. Whitmore's attorney issued a statement at 5 a.m. calling the reporting politically motivated and factually deficient. He paused. He named you specifically Savannah, called you a disgruntled former employee with a history of making false claims in workplace situations. The diner, Brandon and the box of her things and the parking lot where she'd cried quietly. He's using the diner, she said. He's using everything available to him, Marcus said, which means he's scared because a confident man would have ignored you. He paused. How are you doing, honestly? She thought about it. I'm scared, she said, but it's the kind of scared that's focused. Does that make sense? It makes complete sense, he said. Stay focused. Are you somewhere safe? I will be by tonight, she said. She called her mother at 7:30. Linda Hayes answered with the voice of a woman who had been asleep since Dina's cousin's wife had texted her the article link at 6 a.m. and spent the intervening 90 minutes cycling through something Savannah couldn't immediately identify. I read it, her mother said. I know, Savannah said. Your name is in it, your photograph. I know that too. A silence, longer than usual. Then her mother said something Savannah had not expected, had not in any version of this conversation anticipated. I knew something was wrong with this town, her mother said. Her voice was different, stripped of the social performance that usually cushioned everything she said. Just the voice underneath. I knew it for years, when your father was sick and the county insurance appeal kept getting denied. Every appeal for 18 months. And someone at the office told me very quietly that our file had been flagged. She stopped. I never asked why. I was afraid to ask why. Savannah's throat tightened. Mom, she said. I should have asked, her mother said. I should have made noise. Another pause. I'm sorry I didn't teach you how to make noise. I thought staying quiet was how you stayed safe. It was the most honest thing her mother had said to her in years, maybe ever. Savannah sat with it for a moment, letting it be what it was. You kept us alive, Savannah said. That was enough. That was a lot. Her mother exhaled, a long releasing sound. Be careful, she said. Please, just be careful. I've got people looking out for me, Savannah said. Good ones. After she hung up, she sat for a moment with the phone in her lap. Something had shifted in the call with her mother. Some old weight she'd been carrying, without fully acknowledging, had moved, not disappeared, but moved redistributed itself into something more bearable. She filed it away to feel later when there was time for it. Right now, there was movement to make. They left for the mountain property at noon. Ryder drove. Moose followed in a second truck. Colt came separately with supplies and food for 2 weeks, medications, a portable charger, setup, a laptop. Ruth Ann came too, which Savannah hadn't expected, and which undid her slightly when she realized it. You don't have to come, Savannah said to her. You've already lost. Don't finish that sentence, Ruth Ann said firmly, loading a bag into the truck. Dale is staying here because someone needs to manage what's coming. I'm going because you need, she stopped, found the right word. You need someone who knows how to wait, and I'm very good at waiting. She was right. Savannah didn't argue. The property was an hour's drive the last 20 minutes on an unpaved road that the trucks handled without complaint. She didn't ask who owned it or how long the network had used it. Some things you accept as given. This was one. The first day was the hardest. Not because of external pressure. There was nothing external that day except the sound of the wind and Moose's truck in the lot, and Colt periodically checking his phone with the intensity of someone monitoring a battlefield. The hardest part was the stopping, the stillness, the absence of something to do with her hands. She had been in motion for 4 months. Movement had been the mechanism of her control. Here, waiting with the story out and the wheels turning in places she couldn't see or direct, she had to simply exist in the uncertainty. And that was the hardest thing she'd done yet. Ruth Ann found her on the second mornings, sitting at the kitchen table with the empty third notebook open in front of her, pen in hand. Nothing written. "What are you trying to write?" Ruth Ann asked. "I don't know," Savannah said. "I keep starting sentences and they don't go anywhere." Ruth Ann sat down across from her. "Because you've been writing towards something for 4 months. Evidence, pattern, cause, and effect." She nodded at the blank page. "There's nothing to prove right now. The work is done. What you're feeling is what comes after the work." "What is that exactly?" Savannah asked. "Fear with nothing to fight," Ruth Ann said. "It's the most uncomfortable kind." She closed the notebook. That afternoon, Ryder sat down beside her on the steps of the property's main building and handed her a cup of coffee. They sat in silence for several minutes. Savannah had learned that silence with Ryder was not absence. It was a different kind of conversation, the kind between people who had moved past the need to fill space. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," he said. Which she'd learned meant yes. "Why did you hire me?" she asked. "The first night, I walked in there shaking. I had no bar experience. You had no reason to—" "You said you ran out of time," he said. "Not that you needed money, not that you were desperate. You said you ran out of time, as if time was the real thing you'd been working with and it had finally given out." He looked at the middle distance. "That's a person who's been trying, a person who's exhausted all the responsible options before arriving at the last one." He paused. "I've hired a lot of people. The ones who say they need money last 6 weeks. The ones who say they're running out of time, those are the ones who stay." She looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the silver in his hair, at the particular stillness of a man who had survived things by deciding what they meant. "Ruth Ann told me about a woman," she said slowly, "a social worker, 6 years ago. She said you helped her." He was quiet for a moment. "I tried to help her," he said. "I didn't do enough." "That's not what Ruth Ann said." "Ruth Ann is generous," he said. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Her name was Angela. She was 31. She had this quality, this absolute refusal to be intimidated, that coexisted with genuine fear. You could see both things at the same time in her face." He stopped. "She reminded me of my sister." Savannah went still. "I didn't know you had a sister," she said. "Had," he said, just the one word. It had the quality of something he'd said before, but never more often than necessary. She waited. "She was 24, he said. Her name was Claire. She was in a relationship with a man in the county. She lived in different county, different state, years before I came to Wyoming. She filed a report. Twice. Both times it went nowhere. Both times she was told she was overreacting, that her claims were insufficient, that she should consider couples counseling." He stopped. His jaw moved through that familiar arc. "She's not alive anymore." The weight of it landed completely. She didn't say she was sorry. She understood by now that he didn't need her to. She simply let it be what it was between them in the open. "She's why you built the rules," Savannah said. "No one touches the staff. No woman leaves unsafe. The rules aren't policies. They're a promise you made." He looked at her, something in his face that was close to the expression people get when they've been accurately seen. "Yes," he said simply. She understood then fully in a way she hadn't before, that the Iron Widow had never been what the town thought it was. It had been Ryder Cole's answer to the question of what he could control after the one thing that mattered most had slipped past all his reach. He couldn't save his sister. He could build a place where women were safe. He could make that place work through sheer force of will and the particular moral clarity of a man who has looked at failure directly and decided it will not happen again. And she, Savannah, Hayes had walked into that place shaking with $11 and a desperation she hadn't even finished processing and had stumbled directly into the most protected circle in Black Creek, Wyoming, without knowing it. The irony of it sat in her chest, warm and painful in equal measure. The call came on the fourth day, Marcus' voice sharp and moving fast. The state attorney general has formally opened an investigation. Federal involvement is being discussed. There's a civil rights component with the reservation cases that brings in DOJ jurisdiction. Whitmore's attorney has stopped returning calls from the AP, which means they're in crisis mode. He paused for breath. And 3 of his former deputies have reached out to me in the last 24 hours. 3 Savannah. Men who've been inside that department for years. They want to talk. She pressed her hand flat on the table in front of her to keep it steady. When do they talk? She asked. One already did. His testimony it's comprehensive. It corroborates everything in your notebooks and then some. He has emails, Savannah, internal emails from Whitmore directly instructing Heller to bury specific cases. He paused. This is no longer a story. This is a case. She exhaled. A long, complete cellular exhale, the kind that happens when something you've been bracing for finally resolves into something real. When does he get arrested? She asked. That's not my call, Marcus said. But the Attorney General's office is moving with urgency. Days, not weeks, is my read. Another pause. There's one more thing. She heard it in his voice, the hesitation, the particular pause of someone delivering the part they've been holding back. Tell me, she said. The fake video, the one that called you an addict and a liar. He paused. We traced its origin. It was posted from an account created 3 weeks ago, which is standard for this kind of operation throwaway account, untraceable at first look. He stopped. But the account was created using a device registered to a specific IP address. And that IP address belongs to a business in Black Creek. What business? She asked, though something in her chest was already pulling tight. The diner, he said, the one you used to work at, the owner's personal office computer. She sat very still. The owner, she said, not a question. Or someone with access to his office, Marcus said carefully. We don't know yet whether it's him directly or whether someone used his equipment, but she was already thinking. Moving back through the timeline, the way she'd been fired, the owner's nephew, the box of her things, the way the owner hadn't looked at her when he handed it over, the way he'd been so careful not to make eye contact, which she'd read at the time as guilt about the nephew about what Brandon had done. What if it was guilt about something else? What if the owner hadn't been protecting his nephew from accountability? What if he'd been protecting himself from something she was too grateful for the job to have noticed at the time? What if the harassment itself had been a setup, a way to get rid of her before she noticed something she wasn't supposed to see? She pressed her fingers against her temple. Marcus, did Whitmore have a connection to the diner? A pause, longer than she expected. The diner received a county small business grant in 2019. Marcus said slowly. Unusual one, most businesses that size don't qualify. The grant was approved by the county commissioner's office. He paused. Same commissioner whose son had the buried DUI. The wall. Always the same wall, always the same architecture of debt and obligation and strategic kindness that functioned as a leash. He knew, she said. He knew what I was doing before I even started doing it. And when I started getting close, when he heard I was at the bar talking to people, he needed me discredited. She stopped. Brandon didn't harass me because he's a bad person. Brandon harassed me because someone told him it would be useful. She heard Marcus breathing on the other end. I can't confirm that yet, he said quietly, but I'm not dismissing it. She put the phone down. She sat for a long time. Then she got up and found Ryder. He was outside talking to Moose about something mechanical, the comfortable language of men who think in systems. She waited until there was a pause, and then she said, Someone I thought was randomly cruel wasn't random. Ryder looked at her, just looked. It was orchestrated, she said. I think I've been watched since before I started watching back. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does it change what you have? She thought about it. No, she said. It just changes how long it's been happening. Then it changes nothing that matters, he said. She looked at him. You really believe that? I really believe that, he said. The truth doesn't get smaller because someone tried harder to bury it. She went back inside. She sat down with the empty notebook, and this time she wrote. Not evidence, not names and dates. She wrote what she was feeling, which she had not done since she was a teenager, and had believed briefly that writing her feelings down could do something useful with them. She wrote about walking through the door of the Iron Widow for the first time, about the way the silence had felt, about the water glass Ryder had slid across the bar without being asked, about Moose and his crosswords, about Ruth Ann's covered plates in the back kitchen, about the specific, overwhelming surprise of being taken care of by people she'd been told to fear. She wrote about her father, about the appeals that went nowhere, about a system that had failed her family so quietly and so completely that she had grown up believing the failure was theirs. She wrote about what it felt like to stop believing that. On the 7th day, Mason Whitmore was arrested. She heard it first from Colt, who heard it from a contact in town, who had seen the vehicles outside the sheriff's department at 7 in the morning. She confirmed it with Marcus 20 minutes later. He gave her the brief, clean version: federal agents, the Attorney General's office, 2 counts of civil rights violations, 3 counts of obstruction of justice evidence tampering, and 6 additional counts still being formalized. She listened to all of it. When Marcus finished, she said, "What about Heller, Deputy Heller?" "Suspended pending investigation," Marcus said. "He'll be next, most likely." "And the diner owner?" "That investigation is ongoing," he said. "I'll let you know." She thanked him. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen of the Mountain property and held the information in both hands like something that might be fragile. Ruth Ann came in 30 seconds later, which meant she'd been close and listening. "Well," Ruth Ann said. "He's arrested," Savannah said. "Simone." Ruth Ann exhaled. She set both hands on the counter and pressed down. Then she looked up at the ceiling for a moment, a private gesture, something between her and whoever she addressed in those moments. Then she looked at Savannah. "How do you feel?" Ruth Ann asked. Savannah considered it honestly. She had expected to feel triumphant. She had expected something clean and complete, the narrative satisfaction of a thing finished. Instead, she felt something more complicated, the specific emotional texture of a weight removed, which is not the same as lightness. Lightness is simple. The removal of weight is disorienting. Your body doesn't know yet how to stand without it. "I feel like I don't know how to stand up straight," she said. Ruth Ann nodded slowly. "That's right," she said. "That's exactly right. You've been bracing for months. Your body has to learn it's over." She moved to the coffee pot. "Give it time." Savannah looked at the notebook on the table, at the pages of testimony and evidence, at the last pages she'd written by hand, not for a journalist, not for a court, just for herself. Evidence of a different kind. Proof that she had existed through all of this and come out still knowing who she was. "Ruth Ann," she said. Ruth Ann said, pouring. "Thank you for coming up here, for—" She stopped. The sentence had more in it than she knew how to finish. Ruth Ann turned and looked at her for a long moment. Then, "You walked into our bar 3 months ago and started feeding people the truth, one conversation at a time. You think we needed a reason to show up for you?" She set a mug down. "You already gave us one." Outside, she could hear Moose laughing at something Colt had said. The deep, rumbling, surprised laugh of a man who doesn't do it often and means it fully when he does. She could hear Ryder's voice lower, saying something she couldn't make out. The sounds of people who had chosen each other. She had walked into the Iron Widow expecting danger. She had found improbably and without design a family. Not the kind you're born into, the kind you survive into. The kind built from shared risk and honest witness, and the particular tenderness of people who know what it costs to be cared for and choose to pay it anyway. She picked up her coffee. She walked toward the sound of voices. And for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember, she was not bracing for what came next. She was simply walking toward it. She came back to Black Creek on a Tuesday. No announcement, no plan for how it would feel. She simply got in the truck with Ryder and drove down the mountain and watched the town come into view through the windshield, the way you watch something you've thought about so many times the real thing almost doesn't match the version in your head. It matched. That was the strange part. Black Creek looked exactly like itself. Same streets, same storefronts, same water tower with the faded lettering. The world had not rearranged itself to acknowledge what had happened. It never did. That was something nobody told you about, the aftermath of enormous things. The ordinary world just keeps sitting there unchanged on the surface, and you're the one who has to figure out how to re-enter it. She was different. The town was the same. She'd have to find a way to live inside that gap. Ryder parked in front of what had been the Iron Widow. The structure was still there, cleared out. Now the debris removed, the walls standing bare and open, the way a building looks when it's been emptied of everything that made it itself. She got out of the truck and stood on the gravel and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Ryder stood beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking it's smaller than I remembered," she said. "It always is," he said, "after something burns." She turned to look at him. "Are you going to rebuild it?" He was quiet for a moment, not the thoughtful quiet, the kind that means the answer is complicated. "Dale and I talked about it," he said, "about what to rebuild, whether to rebuild the same thing." He looked at the structure. The bar served a purpose, but maybe the purpose was never the bar. She understood what he meant. She had been thinking the same thing in different words for weeks. "What if it was something else?" she said. "What if it was the rules?" He looked at her. "The rules were what made it safe," she said. "Not the building, not the liquor license. The fact that there was a place in this town where certain things simply were not allowed to happen, that was the thing. That was what Karen Dowell meant when she told Patrice it was a safe place." She paused. "What if you built that again, but bigger, not a bar? Something that could take in more people." "Like what?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I know what it needs to do." He looked at the empty building for another long moment. Then he said, "Talk to Dale and Ruth Ann. Whatever you're building in your head, I want to hear it when it's real enough to say out loud." She nodded. She went to see her mother that afternoon. Linda Hayes opened the door before Savannah had finished knocking, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which meant she'd been waiting. She looked at her daughter for a moment with an expression Savannah didn't immediately have a name for. Then she stepped aside and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Savannah had eaten breakfast for 18 years and learned slowly and without anyone saying it directly that the world was something you endured rather than moved through. The same table where she'd laid the overdue bills out and done the math that sent her to the Iron Widow's door in the first place. "I've been watching the news," her mother said. She said it the way people say things when they mean something larger and aren't sure how to get there. "I know," Savannah said. "They interviewed that journalist, Marcus Webb. He said," she stopped, pressed her lips together. "He said you were the one who started it, that without your documentation the case wouldn't have had the structure it needed to hold." "He's generous," Savannah said. "He's accurate," her mother said sharply. And then more quietly, "I looked up Mason Whitmore's record, the grants he controlled, the appeals process he influenced." She set her hands flat on the table. "Your father's appeals, the ones that kept getting denied." Savannah went still. "I looked it up," her mother said again. "The County Insurance Appeals Board. In the years your father was sick, 3 of the 5 board members were appointed by the commissioner's office. The same office." Her voice was steady, but Savannah could hear what was underneath it, the specific grief of a woman who has found the answer to a question she spent years being afraid to ask. "It wasn't random," her mother said. "We weren't just unlucky." "No," Savannah said, "you weren't." Her mother exhaled, a long, shaking exhale. "All those years I thought I'd failed him," she said. "That I hadn't fought hard enough. That if I'd been smarter about it or louder or—" "Mom," Savannah said, "stop." Her mother looked at her. "You kept us alive," Savannah said. "On nothing in a town that was actively working against you. You kept us alive, and you kept me in school, and you never once let me see how scared you were. That wasn't failure. That was extraordinary." She reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. "You didn't have the tools to fight what was being done to you. Now those tools exist. That's different." Her mother looked at their hands, said nothing for a moment. "Then I'm proud of you," she said, just like that, clean and direct and without qualification, which was so unlike her mother that Savannah felt it land somewhere deep and necessary. "Thank you," she said, and meant it completely. She cried on the drive back to the bar property, not the controlled, quiet crying of a person managing themselves in public, the other kind. The full kind. The kind that happens when something you've needed for a very long time finally arrives and your body responds before your mind can organize a response. She pulled over for 8 minutes on a county road and let it happen. Then she wiped her face, checked her mirrors, and drove the rest of the way. The investigation moved fast after that. Faster than anyone had predicted. Deputy Heller resigned on a Wednesday and retained a lawyer on a Thursday, which Marcus told her was the standard pattern of a man calculating whether cooperation was more valuable than silence. The diner owner, his name was Gerald Pratt, which she had always known, but which now felt significant in a way it hadn't before, was formally connected to the video campaign. His attorney argued coercion. Pratt claimed Whitmore had leveraged the small business grant against him, effectively forcing his participation. The DA was skeptical. Savannah didn't have strong feelings about whether Pratt was a victim or a participant. She had enough complexity to manage without adding Gerald Pratt's moral ambiguity to the pile. Warren Gill received a formal settlement from the mining company within 6 weeks of Whitmore's arrest. The wage theft had been protected by Whitmore's influence over the labor board investigator. Once that protection dissolved, the case resolved with a speed that made clear it had always been resolvable. Warren called her from his truck on the day the check arrived, crying openly in the way of a man who had decided he was past the age where crying required explanation. "My guys got paid," he said. "All of them. Every cent." "I know," she said. "I saw the filing." "I told them it was you," he said. "My crew. I told them some girl at a bar took notes and didn't stop." "You went on record," she said. "That took more than notes." "We did it together," he said firmly, with the tone of a man closing an argument. She let him close it. The boy from the reservation, his name was Danny Runningwater. She had learned, which he had given her that night, with the same matter-of-fact quality he gave everything, received an apology from the county. A formal, documented apology with specific language, acknowledging that his report had been improperly dismissed. It was not everything. It was not justice in the complete sense of the word, but it was the county in writing saying we did wrong and we know it. Danny called it a start. Savannah thought that was exactly right. A start was not nothing. A start was where everything began. The building plans came together in February. She had been right that she didn't know exactly what it was when she described it to Ryder on the gravel of the burned lot. But by February, she knew. Dale knew. Ruth Ann had characteristically known first. It would be a community space. Part kitchen, a real one with the capacity to produce meals at scale. Part garage, where Dale and Colt would run a mechanic training program for young people who needed vocational skills and a place where they were taken seriously. Part meeting room, available by arrangement to anyone who needed it. Emergency transportation for women leaving dangerous situations, coordinated quietly through the network Ryder had been maintaining for years. A small scholarship fund, seeded by donations from people who had read Marcus Webb's story and felt the specific pull of wanting to be part of what happened next. Ruth Ann named it. She announced it at the table one morning simply and without ceremony. "We'll call it the Creek." A pause. Because things that move through difficult terrain and keep going deserve a name. Nobody argued with Ruth Ann when she used that voice. The day they broke ground, something happened that Savannah hadn't anticipated. People came. Not a crowd, not a ceremony, nothing organized. But over the course of the morning, people simply arrived. Warren Gill showed up with 3 of his crew members, all in work boots, ready to be useful. Sylvia from the county clerk's office appeared with coffee for 20. The reservation families, Danny's mother, 2 aunts, several men Savannah recognized from the bar's orbit without knowing their names, came and worked alongside Dale through most of the afternoon. Karen Dowell came. Patrice came. 2 women Savannah had never met who had read the AP story and driven 4 hours from Casper specifically for this day. Dina came last, arriving at noon in her old Subaru, getting out and walking directly to Savannah and hugging her without preamble, the hard, certain hug of a person who has a lot of banked emotion and has finally found the right moment to spend it. "You should have told me everything from the beginning," Dina said into her shoulder. "I know," Savannah said. "I was protecting you." "You were protecting everyone except yourself," Dina said. Classic. Savannah laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. "I had good people protecting me." "You did," Dina said. She pulled back and looked at her. "You look different." "Different how?" Dina considered. "Like you stopped waiting for something bad to happen," she said. "Like you finally believe the good thing is actually going to hold." Savannah thought about that, about how accurate it was and how long it had taken to get there, and how the distance between who she had been and who she was now was measured not in months but in choices. The choice to walk through the door, the choice to keep the notebook, the choice to call Marcus, the choice to stay when every piece of the system around her was being mobilized to make her go. She looked around at the gravel lot, at the people working, At Moose directing two men on where to place a beam with the patient authority of someone who has been underestimated so long, he finds it more useful than offensive. At Colt talking to Danny with the focused energy of two young men, discovering they have more in common than geography would suggest. At Dale hammer in hand with the particular satisfaction of a man rebuilding something from the materials of what was destroyed. At Ruth Ann standing slightly apart watching all of it, with her arms crossed and her expression doing the thing it always did, that combination of appreciation and awareness, the look of a woman who has seen enough of the world to know when something is worth witnessing. At Ryder, who was doing what he always did, working without announcement present, without performance, making sure things held together without requiring acknowledgement that he was doing it. He caught her looking, gave her the short nod, the one she had learned in her first week to read as the equivalent of everything he didn't say out loud. She gave it back. She thought about the girl who had stood on the other side of that bar door 9 months ago, with $11 and shaking hands in the particular desperate logic that hunger is louder than fear. That girl had walked through expecting danger. She had found rules instead, rules that protected rather than punished. People who were rough and real and present in a way the respectable world had never managed to be for her. She had found a man grieving his sister through the architecture of a safe place. She had found Ruth Ann's covered plates and Moose's crossword puzzles and Colt's welding certification and Dale's 3-weekend bar counter that was now ash, but had been for a long time something built with care. She had found that the scariest address in Black Creek was not the most dangerous place in it. She had found that fear, when examined honestly, is sometimes a map, not to where you shouldn't go, but to where you're most needed. And she had found herself. Not a new self, she understood that now. The same self she'd always been, finally in a place that had enough room for all of it. The steadiness, the precision, the habit of organization that had made her a good waitress and a thorough investigator, and now apparently someone people trusted to build something. Marcus called her that afternoon while the work was still going. She stepped away from the noise to take it. The Whitmore sentencing is scheduled for April, he said. The prosecutor's office wants to know if you'll make a victim impact statement. She hadn't thought about that, about standing in a courtroom and addressing in formal language what 16 years of deliberate corruption had cost the people of Black Creek, about saying it out loud in a room where it would be documented. Yes, she said without hesitation. You don't have to decide right now, Marcus said. I already decided, she said. The answer is yes. Some things need to be said in rooms where they're recorded. He was quiet for a moment, then, you know, when Ryder first called to me about you, he said, and I'm telling you this because I think you should know, he said, she's the kind of person who does the right thing, not because it's easy, but because she can't figure out how to do otherwise. A pause. I've covered a lot of people who've done brave things. That description is the most accurate account of courage I've ever heard. She stood with that for a moment, letting it be real, not deflecting it, not minimizing it, not doing the thing she had done her whole life with anything good hold it at arm's length in case it turned out not to be true. She let it be true. Tell him I said he's more generous than he'd ever admit, she said. He'd deny it, Marcus said. I know, she said. Tell him anyway. She went back to the noise, back to the work, back to the growing structure of the thing being built on the ground where something had burned, which was the oldest story there was, and also somehow still surprising every time it happened, that out of ash, when the people are right and the will is real, something better comes. The creek opened its doors on a Saturday in late April, 3 days after Mason Whitmore received a federal sentence of 11 years and was let out of a Cheyenne courtroom in a suit that no longer fit the person inside it. The timing was not planned. It simply happened that way the most meaningful things tend to, not on schedule, but at exactly the right moment. Savannah stood at the entrance and watched the first family come through. A woman, 2 children, a look on her face that Savannah recognized from the inside, the specific expression of someone who has arrived at a place they were told to be afraid of and found it different than described. Found it against all the warnings safe. Ruth Ann was at the kitchen. Dale was in the garage. Moose was at the door, massive and steady and gentle as he always was when it counted. Colt was showing Danny and 2 other young men from the reservation how the equipment worked, his voice patient and specific and proud in the way of someone who has been given something worth passing on. And Ryder stood beside Savannah at the entrance, looking at the room filling with people, with the expression she had learned to read as the closest he came to joy, that composed internal, almost invisible satisfaction of a man who builds things for other people and never requires them to notice. She thought about Claire, about the promise Ryder had made without words in the architecture of a bar with strict rules in a town that had none. She thought about what it meant to carry a grief that large and turn it over years into something that protected people instead of just hurting. She thought about her father and the appeals that went nowhere, and her mother pressing her hands flat on the table and saying, "I knew something was wrong with this town." She thought about this notebook. The first one, the cheap spiral-bound one from the case station 2 towns over, bought with cash that had started as organization and become investigation and ended up being the first chapter of something none of them had fully seen coming. "You okay?" Ryder asked beside her. She looked at him. At this man who had asked her 9 months ago in a bar, going silent around her, if she was lost. Who had slid a glass of water across a counter without being asked. Who had hired her not despite her desperation, but because of what her desperation said about who she was. "Yeah," she said, "I really am." He nodded, once, short, complete. She turned back to the room, to the people in it, to the thing that had been built from nothing but will and honesty in the specific radical act of refusing to be silent in a town that had perfected the art of making people so. She had walked into the Iron Widow because she had run out of time. She had found on the other side of that door that she had not run out of anything. She had simply arrived at the place where she was supposed to begin. And everything that the world had told her to fear had turned out to be, in the end, exactly where she belonged.